How is everyone doing today? You guys having a good time here at the Bitcoin 2013 conference? It was about a year and a half ago that I was at the first ever Bitcoin conference in New York City. And there were only about 60 or 70 people there. But the number of friendships and businesses and projects that came out of that meeting led to a tremendous number of great things that we have today. So I can't imagine what this conference with over 1,000 people is going to yield in a year or 2 years. It's going to be very exciting. My name is Erik Voorhees. Some of you know me as Voorhees on the forums and on Reddit. I discovered Bitcoin in May of 2011, just before the first bubble. And through 2012, I was the head of marketing and communications for BitInstant, which is one of the largest Bitcoin companies in the world based out of New York City. And a couple months ago, I left BitInstant to be the CEO of Coinapult, which is now based down in Panama. Coinapult allows people to send Bitcoin to email and SMS through your phone. And some of you may know that I'm involved in a little project called Satoshi Dice, which is the world's largest and most popular Bitcoin game. It is responsible for roughly half of all Bitcoin transactions that have ever occurred, and more than half of all the mining fees that have ever been paid. But this talk is about how we get around the 21 million Bitcoin limit. I've started to think that it's a very silly rule and that we actually need a monetary supply that can grow with the economy. I'm just kidding. It's actually about the role of Bitcoin as money. And it's intended to give people a better understanding of money itself, because to really understand Bitcoin, you have to understand money from a very fundamental point of view. So for this talk, you can forget the tech, you can forget the mining, you can forget all the cryptography and the peer-to-peer networks and the open source code, and you can forget these things because I don't understand them either. But more importantly, all these things are really secondary to an understanding of money itself. The core of the Bitcoin experiment is not about tech, it is about money. So unfortunately, most people do not spend enough time pondering the nature of money. And this is strange and somewhat tragic because we spend our lives chasing it. Money is half of every transaction. It is the most important commodity in the world. And yet, for the most part, people have only the most superficial understanding of it. And from an early age, we understand that money is good, right? We want it. We're happy when we have it, and we're sad when we don't. And we learn that to obtain money, we must work hard. And as we leave childhood, we go to school for many years and work very hard so that we may obtain more money. So much of our lives is spent searching and grasping for something that we don't really understand. Now, on the surface, the reason that we seek this money is very simple, right? It lets us buy things. The utility of a new car, or the entertainment value of an Xbox, or the delicious flavor of a nice steak dinner, all these things are apparent to us. And if we want those things, we have to get money in order to buy them. But what we don't spend enough time considering is why the money we use actually enables us to obtain the car, the Xbox, and the dinner. Why is a shoemaker willing to give us his shoes in return for our money? And you cannot answer this by saying that the shoemaker will in turn hand his money over to someone else, because this begs the question, why does that person want the money? And if nobody actually wants the money and they only care about what the money can buy, how did this whole crazy system get started? Who was the first person tricked into accepting something so silly as money in return for something real? So this is what we want to examine. We want to see how we got to this point. Now, in school, we learned that before we had money, we had something called a barter system. Caveman number 1 would trade his fresh mammoth meat for a nice new spear from Caveman 2. And bartering in this way makes intuitive sense to us, and even as children, we engage in it. School then tells us that there is something wrong with bartering, something called a coincidence of wants. For if Caveman 1 wants the spear from Caveman 2, then that's fine, but what if he doesn't want a spear? In a barter system, few trades are able to occur because of this dilemma, and the extent of the market is severely limited. And again, this makes intuitive sense. So we learned that to get around the coincidence of wants dilemma, money was invented. And money is simply the name for a common medium of exchange whereby everyone agrees to trade money instead of other objects. And we learned that things like wampum shells were early forms of money, and that eventually people began to use gold and silver. And now, today, we've used fiat paper bills as our form of money. And since this narrative is presented to us as one of ongoing human development, most children tend to grow up assuming that dollars or euros or yen are proper money, and things like seashells and gold are outdated relics. Further, they come to perceive dollars as a very physical item, because they can hold physical bills in their wallet, and we all see movies with the bad guys robbing the bank and stealing big piles of cash, and we all want that pile of cash. So even though nearly all of our dollars are digital today, we still perceive them as something very physical. And with this as our frame of reference, Bitcoin looks kind of absurd, doesn't it? If one compares dollars to Bitcoin, Bitcoin looks like a joke. It's purely digital. It's not backed by any trusty government. Unregulated. No presidential heads or Latin incantations inscribed upon it. Clearly, it is nothing more than magic internet money. An absurd fad, a bubble, tulip mania, pets.com, Ponzi scheme. But why is it that some people believe in money, in Bitcoin as money, when it is so clearly different to dollars, which are clearly the best form of money that we could ever hope to have? And I think it's because these people have a different understanding of money itself. And this different understanding is not really taught to us in school. Consider that a crucial question may have been missed. Why were seashells or gold chosen as money in the first place? Was there a vote? Did people just wake up and start using it? Do people switch over one morning as they do with daylight savings time? I believe that the question of why gold became money is in fact one of the most egregious lapses in modern education. Gold was the money of the world all the way up until 1971. Why was this the case? Why was it gold and not rubies or eggs or feathers? And if gold was chosen as money, and no one ever seems to have enough money, then why wasn't something more plentiful like grass chosen as money? Clearly, if grass had been chosen as money, we would all have plenty of it, and poverty would have been wiped out thousands of years ago. So whose bright idea was it to choose gold? In an absence of a proper education, most people assume that society just arbitrarily decided to make gold money, and that any other commodity would have worked roughly as well. They perceive money as an arbitrary token, but this is a mistake, and this is where the grand misunderstanding of Bitcoin begins. Because if money is an arbitrary token, and we already have an arbitrary token backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, why should we get distracted by some other arbitrary token? And the reason is that money is not arbitrary. Money is selected with very good reason and through a very natural process. Now, gold became money gradually over time, not by mistake, but because it had specific attributes that made it highly useful in exchange. It is these attributes, these specific properties of gold, which led it to be used increasingly as a medium of exchange. Simply put, gold had better properties than anything else. So what are these properties of gold? Gold is scarce. And this is important because if something like grass was our medium of exchange, how many wheelbarrows full of grass would you need to take to the store in order to buy your food? Gold is fungible and uniform. Every ounce of gold is the same as every other. This is why things like rubies or diamonds, while they could work as money, aren't as ideal as gold. Gold is transportable. It has a high value to weight ratio. It's easily identifiable. And it is highly durable. It will not rot when you try to save it. And the supply of gold is relatively steady and predictable. And so if you understand that these attributes make gold a great means of exchange, you'll understand why gold was increasingly sought in the marketplace. And what this means is that a money-based system is not actually something separate from a barter system at all. It's simply a barter system that has been running for a while, a barter system that has coalesced around one or several key goods. We're actually still in a barter system, and most people today prefer to barter for goods called gold or dollars or Bitcoin. We call these most exchangeable of goods money. So money is thus nothing more than the outcome of barter. And historically, this has tended to be gold simply because it had the best attributes for use in exchange. And so if we understand this and we see the genesis of gold's monetary use, that it was nothing magical or arbitrary, gold simply had the best properties for exchange and was thus frequently bartered for, then it should not be a stretch to imagine that a commodity with even better properties than gold might make an even better money. And this is what I found when I discovered Bitcoin. Now, but wait, Eric, some of you might say this. We already have something better than gold. It's called the United States Federal Reserve Note, also known as the dollar. Certainly the Federal Reserve Note is superior to gold, and that's why we use it today. Well, let's examine the properties of this form of money. Dollars are fungible and uniform, and that's good. They are transportable, perhaps even more easily than gold. They have a high value to weight ratio. They're fairly easy to divide and recombine. So this looks pretty good so far, but what else? Well, they've lost 98% of their value since the Federal Reserve created them. Why is that? Well, it's because they are constantly created out of thin air. Every year, vast new quantities of dollars are produced. This is called inflation. And while most people assume that inflation is just a natural phenomenon, like rain or sunshine, that's incorrect. It's just money being created and debased constantly. And in fact, it may be the greatest scam ever devised. But a scam needs a victim. Why would anyone choose to accept a form of money that could be constantly created out of thin air, and which loses purchasing power with every passing day? The reason is that they are forced to. They are forced to pay tribute to the government using this money through a scheme called taxation and through legal tender laws. In other words, dollars are not used over gold because the attributes of the dollars are superior. A free market does not choose dollars because of the merit of the dollars. Dollars are used because people are forced to use them. And we could discuss why the government forces people to use dollars or the various ways in which it does this. But those are topics for a different discussion. So these are the concepts behind money that people need to understand. Gold's value is due to its specific attributes, while the dollar's value is due to legal force. So how does this relate to Bitcoin? Bitcoin's value as money needs to be understood like gold, which comes not from legal force, but from its specific attributes. Bitcoin's attributes make it an amazing form of money, and it was engineered just for that purpose. So what are these attributes? Bitcoin is easy to divide and recombine. Incredibly easy, in fact. You can divide it into 100 million pieces and recombine it on your phone. Bitcoin cannot be counterfeited, unlike dollars, and to some degree, unlike gold, which is occasionally filled with tungsten. Bitcoin is highly durable. So long as certain precautions are taken, Bitcoins will not just disappear or decay over time. And perhaps most important, Bitcoin can be sent anywhere instantly at near zero cost. Now, if you were to create a superhero currency, this is an attribute that you would give it. It is essentially the ability to fly. Now, you can't do this with gold due to physical constraints, and you can't do this with dollars due to legal constraints. Further, Bitcoin is scarce. It has a known supply and a very fixed inflation schedule that everyone understands. Further, Bitcoin cannot be manipulated, restricted, or seized by any central party. It shares this property with gold. Nobody has special privileges. In this way, it is very democratic and egalitarian. And just as mankind has engineered houses to be used as shelter and cars to be used as transportation, so too can we engineer something to be used as an ideal medium of exchange. But while the dollar is a very poorly engineered money, so poorly in fact that it requires coercion for its value, Bitcoin is a brilliantly engineered money. And it might not be perfect, but Bitcoin is pretty damn good. And this is why people are using it as money despite the fact that nobody is forced to. And given that it is so useful as money due to its attributes, it should not be a surprise to anyone that it commands a market price. Any good that is useful and scarce will have a price. Economists and journalists often get caught up in this question, why does Bitcoin have value? And the answer is very easy, because it is useful and scarce. I think these people should be asking the more important question, why do they have value? And the corollary here is that Bitcoin's value can never reach zero unless it is no longer useful or no longer scarce. So this brings us to the more interesting topic. For if Bitcoin is so well engineered as money, won't it necessarily begin competing with other forms of money? A fair question would be, well, if that were true, Eric, why have people not tended toward gold over the dollar? Isn't gold, as you claim, a superior form of money? The reason is that while gold works very well as a store of value, indeed the best that the world has ever known, it doesn't work so well as a means of exchange in our modern society, and this should be obvious. Transacting in physical gold is unfortunately quite a burden, and while services like e-gold had huge potential, they inevitably fail because as soon as they become successful, the government shuts them down. To those of you who don't know, e-gold was a company several years ago that allowed you to have a digital currency that was backed by gold, held by the e-gold company. And this was brilliant, and it worked very nicely until they got too big and they were shut down. If a digital gold company becomes too successful, the government will simply destroy it. And this is why gold remains safely in vaults. It is used for storing wealth, but not used so well as a currency. So we see that physical bullion is too inconvenient, and a digital bullion currency is a fantasy because it requires backing by a party that can be shut down. This is also why anyone who suggests that Bitcoin should be backed by a real asset, such as gold, is gravely misunderstanding the situation. Backing injects counterparty risk, because a specific person or entity must be obligated to fulfill the backing. Backing requires a backer. Bitcoin does not need backing, because it is a digital commodity that is valuable itself, and valuable in large part because it carries no physical burdens or constraints. It is this lack of physical backing which enables it to move anywhere instantly at near zero cost. So one can see that Bitcoin is revolutionary in this regard. For the first time ever, a form of money, superior to all others due to its specific attributes, has been successfully decentralized and decoupled from the material world in such a way that nobody can turn the system off. And the world has never seen this before. I think that there is now a certain inevitability that markets around the world will gradually gravitate toward this superior money. After all, money is a good like all others, and it competes for the attention of those using it. So I think it is fair to say that Bitcoin is a monumental invention that has finally been captured by mankind. And if you understand the deep and central role that money plays in every aspect of our lives, then might not Bitcoin be considered as important as things like the printing press or the automobile or the internet? And considering these other inventions, not everybody is literate, not everybody has a car, and not everybody is online, but everybody uses money. And for those who are wondering, you do not even need the internet to use Bitcoin. So all of you who are involved in this right now are making history. And perhaps most exciting about this is that the only thing which can derail this invention is an even better invention. If you play through the various scenarios in your mind, you'll realize that Bitcoin can only fail if a superior currency takes its place, in which case mankind is even better off, and the promise of Bitcoin will carry forward into its successor. So the genie is truly out of the bottle, and we are right now in the middle of a very grand experiment to see what this genie is capable of. The point is this: Bitcoin, like gold, has properties that make it an excellent form of money. However, unlike gold, Bitcoin can actually be used in our modern economy for day-to-day exchange. Unlike gold, Bitcoin, as an asset with no counterparty risk, can be transferred to anyone on the planet in 1 second. It is superhero currency, and nobody's permission is needed. There is no terms of service. Further, Bitcoin's decentralized nature means that it is not in danger of being shut off. The incumbent monetary monopolist cannot stop it. Perhaps you know to whom I'm referring. Thus, Bitcoin can actually achieve critical mass. And nothing has ever been able to claim these attributes before. And this is why it is very foolish to compare Bitcoin to any other digital currency, from Facebook credits to World of Warcraft gold to everyone's favorite virtual currency, the United States dollar. Bitcoin's attributes enable it to operate freely and grow with an increasingly larger sphere of activity. Inevitably, this means it will start displacing monies with inferior attributes. Bitcoin will grow like a benevolent hydra, with heads sprouting up in every country and every community. It will gobble up commerce that has, until now, been shackled to the economic witchcraft of a decrepit fiat financial system. And it will leave an expansive, frictionless marketplace in its wake. It is up to all of you guys to grow and capture and nurture that new marketplace. Someday in school, I think that the curriculum will be different. The children will be taught the true nature of money. They'll learn the difference between a real asset like Bitcoin, which is based on merit, and a virtual currency like the US dollar, which is based on coercion. They'll learn how powerful a market can be when its medium of exchange is honest. And they'll learn how a small group of idealistic entrepreneurs saved the world from a monetary dark age. I feel very excited for my children to someday grow up in this world. And I am deeply honored to be here with all of you in San Jose working on this project. And I can't wait to see what happens. Thank you very much. So we'll open it up to questions. I don't know how much time we have left, but questions here at the mic.
Hi, Eric. As a fellow libertarian, I'm very sympathetic to your point of view. But I think you will also be sympathetic to the idea that Bitcoin presents an existential threat to the state, and that the state isn't going to go down without fighting. What are your thoughts on the importance of the exchanges and how we're going to get past the exchanges as central points being attacked by the state? You seem to have an optimistic perspective that we're just going to get to the other side. I want to know what you think about the path to getting there.
People often complain that the exchanges in Bitcoin mean that actually decentralization is a myth and that we're far too centralized. What people forget is that while a certain exchange may be centralized, the concept of exchange is decentralized. Any exchange that becomes taken down or molested in some way can be very easily replaced by an exchange somewhere else. And not just a formal corporate exchange with millions of dollars, but people meeting in a Starbucks or people transacting just over the internet with each other. So the fact that Bitcoin is currently exchanged mostly centrally in a couple of large exchanges does not mean that that's always how it has to be. And if there is any resistance to that problem, Bitcoin can route around that very easily.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm a surveillance and monetary scholar writing my thesis on Bitcoin, and I thank the foundation for giving me a grant to come here. And I've been puzzling over these same questions that you've raised. I appreciate that you brought up the state theory of money. And I just wanted to ask you if you really believe that this is a new form of money that we're starting to use, do you believe that we're in fact entering a new form of time?
No. I'm not sure what you mean by a new form of time.
Well, I mean, it's something I'm trying to puzzle through too, but just to give you an example, I mean, every time we make a deposit in our bank account or we write a date on a check, we are in fact inserting money into the teleos of Christ. And I don't imagine that there are a lot of evangelicals here. And you could even theorize that money is the kind of the faith of the atheist, if you will, or the stranger. And so it's just a question that occurred to me.
Well, I certainly don't want to mess with anyone's teleos.
Actually, I just want to give a follow-up point that you're talking about this myth of barter. Well, in Dr. David Graeber's book, The Credit for 5,000 Years, he talks about that exact same point, where that actually from barter, credit came before money, where like, let's say you had these, the coincidence of wants, well, maybe the trusted person in your tribe or your social group would be the person all that would coalesce to, and you would go to this person, he'd kind of be your marketplace, your barter, and how he put gold in currencies and in a paradigm of, in low trust environments, people would go through payment methods that you could settle right there. Like if you had soldiers coming through the town and you had some goods to trade as they're going off to battle, you don't want to extend them credit to someone that's going to go off and maybe come back or not. But if they have some gold or something, you'll settle with them right there. Mm-hmm. But then in times of high trust and usually peace and prosperity, it's when you have more of a robust credit system. And if we look through different monetary instruments that you see over history, you see lots of evidence of not money, but lots of credit instruments, and even in Egyptian hieroglyphs. One of the first things we saw was actual tablets showing different transactions and kind of balancing out the goods of payments. So I think that's something that kind of follows up with what you're saying, is that is a myth that's been put onto us, but I don't think it's correct that we kind of went to this bartering and then all of a sudden we just created money and went forward.
What I was saying is certainly a gross oversimplification. Barter was not the only means of exchange, and certainly may have only been a minority of it. But I think the fact that people all know that we trade with each other, and we can see that if you trade with each other more and more, you'll tend to trade for things that you can trade with other people, and I think it's a very natural process, and so I'm saddened to see that a lot of people don't seem to understand how that whole phenomenon works. But I agree that if we were to dive into more of the credit stuff, that it would get a little more complicated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion about the generation limit of Bitcoin and whether that's a feature or in the long term that's actually going to hold back the currency by setting an artificial limit to the money supply. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, about the strengths of Bitcoin as a currency relative to other currencies out there when there is this hard limit on the money supply. If we look forward 50, maybe 100 years from now, if we're still using Bitcoin, and we are limited to those 21 million Bitcoins that are circulating. And I know you can divide them up to as many decimal places as you want, but there is still that hard-coded limit, and there's only so far you can go with decimal places before it gets convoluted.
I think you can go pretty far with decimal places. I think that if there was no hard limit on Bitcoin, I never would have gotten interested in it in the first place. I think that is a core fundamental purpose of this entire currency. We could call it an experiment. We can see, well, maybe in the future people will look back and say, yes, it was the hard limit which prevented Bitcoin from succeeding. But I think they're going to be saying the very opposite, that it was the hard limit that actually allowed it to be something new and different. And that's what everyone latched onto in this time where any money could be printed by any group of people except for this one.
Hi. I'm Onat. I'm a graduate student in self-assembling materials, so very libertarian in spirit. So I wanted to ask a few questions to refine the thesis. Back on campus, I'm also preaching sort of similar arguments, but in this sort of friendly environment, I thought to sort of sharpen our understanding. So one of the questions that comes is, why not silver, right? We don't have the same coercion, perhaps, of not being able to trade with it. And it fits all our variables. It's scarce, fungible, transportable, durable. There's a steady supply of it. So why not silver? Should there be some other variable that, gold lived up to and Bitcoin can live up to?
I think that silver and gold fall into a very similar category. Neither of them can be sent anywhere in the world instantly at near zero cost. So
that's, again, going back to the ease of transmitting it.
Which is a huge point, right?
So that's what you meant by transportable. Okay. The way I thought the argument was being developed was, here's gold, and it, did its job great, but then we needed to supplant this alternative, which is US dollars, and we sort of ruled out gold, and we needed this other alternative. But you're saying, no, that's not what I was saying. Okay, I think I get it.
So not to be rude, but there are a bunch of people, and we only have a couple minutes, so I might ask for other questions.
Sure.
Thank you, though.
Hi, I'd like to thank you for coming. I'm currently an economics student, and I haven't pledged allegiance to any school of economic thought just yet. But I must ask, how do you address the wealth of evidence that does support that in at least the short term an increase in monetary supply has an effect on growth.
Well, if you measure growth as spending, then of course printing money is going to increase growth. We measure growth in this country by GDP, which is simply a measure of how much money is being spent. If the government prints a whole bunch of money and everyone goes around buying refrigerators, GDP is going to skyrocket. But everyone's now poorer. So this whole idea that economy should be measured by GDP in the first place, I think, is abhorrent and has led to a lot of the problems that we have today.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your very eloquent speech. I see a very striking similarity between Bitcoin and the internet. And while the internet at the beginning, opened the floods of the gates of information to everybody, I think nowadays it's being used in a very strategic way by governments to target on leaks and spy on everyone. So to keep it short, although while us libertarians have a lot of control over Bitcoin,
I'm actually a Democrat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bitcoin proponents, then how about that? This question applies for everybody. Do you think that the government in the near future will actually abuse some of the openness of Bitcoin, and actually we might end up worse than using cash?
I don't think that anything that allows individuals to take ownership of private property is ever going to make anything worse. Will the government try to use it for nefarious purposes? Absolutely. But the fact that any individual now can pull the wealth into their own possession and send it to anyone else, and it is in their own possession, I don't see any way that the government could corrupt that.
My name is Charles Evans. I teach finance in Florida at Florida Atlantic University. And one of the things that gets lost in a lot of these talks is that there's a lot more to the protocol than just the payment system. It has incorporated within it the ability to sign contracts, and that there's a key to a particular account. If we map an individual or a company or a club or whatever to an account is a separate topic, but it is tractable. An insurance policy is a contract. An option is a contract. A future, a forward is a contract. A bill of sale is a contract. A prospectus is a contract that spawns shares. A bond is a contract. A lease is a contract. An employment agreement is a contract. You could gun down every exchange operator in the world as long as the wallets are running, the protocol's running, and I will write promissory notes for cigarettes and use those as many as I have to. And those of you who are worried about the Satoshi being the smallest unit, I'll be more than happy to write promissory notes for 1/1 trillionth of a Satoshi. And then if you bring me a trillion of those, I'll give you a Satoshi. That's what he's trying to get at. This thing is been kidney punched already many, many times, and that's why we're still fixated on mining and day trading. But if you take that away, you've got this thing underneath. I'm actually appalled that I have as much value as I have in Bitcoin. Thank you very much, but I would be just as pleased if we were playing with the damn protocol and creating...
Well, it's open source. Have you heard?
No, I understand. I heard the rumor, but that's communism.
Open source is communism?
Yeah.
Open source is the absolute opposite of communism. Okay, I think we're out of time, but I'm sorry. That was the last one. But you can talk to me afterward. All right, thanks everyone.